On a cold Thursday morning in March of 2019, Clara Whitfield walked into the Harlan County Farm Co-op in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and said 4 words that stopped every conversation in the room. She was going to plant sunflowers. Gerald Fitch looked up from the counter. He was 52 years old, had managed that co-op for 19 years, and had sold conventional inputs to every serious farmer in the county. He looked at Clara, 34 years old, her father's canvas work jacket hanging 2 sizes too large off her shoulders, worn boots, a soil report folded under her arm that nobody had asked her to bring, and he laughed. Not a quiet laugh, the kind that carries across a room and makes 8 men turn around to see who is being humiliated. Sunflowers, Gerald said, on wheat ground. Clara, your daddy would be embarrassed. The 8 men said nothing. They didn't have to. Clara looked at Gerald Fitch. She looked at his clean hands and his pressed flannel and his 19 years of certainty. She tucked the soil report back under her arm. She did not argue. She did not explain. She walked out of that co-op and let the door close behind her. What Gerald didn't know, what not one of those 8 men knew, was what Clara had found folded inside her father's glove box 2 weeks before that Thursday morning. Dale Whitfield died on a Tuesday morning in October of 2018, alone in his own barn, the way a lot of quiet men go, without warning, without witnesses, without any of the words he meant to say still left in him. He was 61 years old. He had farmed the same 160 acres of Harlan County wheat ground for 41 years. He had bought that land with borrowed money in 1977, paid it off by 1989, and never carried a mortgage again. He was not a man who complained. He was not a man who asked for help. He was a man who got up before the sun, worked until he couldn't see his hands in front of his face, and sat down to supper like that was the most natural thing in the world. Clara found him at 7:30 that morning when she came to check on him before driving to work. She was the one who called the ambulance. She was the one who waited in the barn doorway while the paramedics did what paramedics do when there is nothing left to do. She was the one who drove home that night to a farmhouse with a broken furnace and sat at the kitchen table with her father's ledger open in front of her and understood for the first time exactly what he had left her. 160 acres of wheat ground. A farmhouse that needed a new roof and a new furnace and a new water heater, and about 15 years of deferred maintenance addressed all at once, and $94,000 in operating debt accumulated across 3 consecutive harvests that had come in below break-even, 3 years of Dale buying inputs on credit at the Harlan County Co-op and hoping the next season would turn it around. It never turned around. The wheat ground itself was the real problem, though Dale had never quite said it out loud. Yields had been falling for a decade. In 2009, the field north of the barn had made 41 bushels per acre. By 2015, it was making 33. By 2018, it was making 28, and Dale was spending more per acre on inputs than he had in 2009 to get there. The soil was exhausted, compacted at 14 inches depth from decades of the same tillage pass at the same depth every spring. Organic matter measured at 1.1%, less than half of what productive wheat ground should carry. Earthworm counts near 0. The ground was tired in the way that ground gets tired when you take from it year after year without putting anything back. Clara knew all of this because Clara had spent 6 years as an agricultural extension assistant working across 2 counties, studying soil health, cover crop systems, and alternative crop rotations that the farmers she worked with almost never wanted to hear about. She had soil tested the Whitfield ground herself in the spring of 2018, 8 months before Dale died. She had shown him the numbers at the kitchen table one Sunday afternoon. Dale had looked at the report for a long time. He had not said much. He had folded it carefully and set it on the counter and gone back outside. Clara had not pushed. She knew her father. You did not push Dale Whitfield toward a conclusion. You put the information in front of him and let him get there himself. He never got the chance. Now the information was hers. The ground was hers. The debt was hers. and the soil report she had carried into the Harlan County Farm Co-op on that Thursday morning in March, the one nobody had asked to see, the one Gerald Fitch had not glanced at once while he was busy laughing, that report told her exactly what the ground needed and exactly how to give it. Nobody in that co-op had ever thought to ask her what it said. But let me tell you what Clara found in her father's glove box, because that is where this story actually begins. She found it on a Saturday afternoon in late February, 3 weeks after the funeral, while cleaning out her father's truck. It was folded twice and tucked into the back of the glove box behind the registration papers, and an old receipt from the feed store, dated June of 2014. A single page torn carefully from the September 1987 issue of Progressive Farmer magazine, worn soft at the creases from years of being folded and unfolded and folded again. The headline read, "Kansas Farmer Turns Exhausted Wheat Ground Around with One Unconventional Season." The article was about a man named Roy Ellison, who farmed 280 acres outside of Dodge City. In 1984, after 12 consecutive years of declining wheat yields on his best ground, Ellison had pulled 80 acres out of wheat entirely and planted them to sunflowers. His neighbors had called it a waste. His banker had called it reckless. His co-op had told him he was throwing good money after bad. Ellison had planted anyway. The sunflower taproots, some reaching 5 and 6 feet into the soil, had fractured the hardpan layer that had been strangling his wheat roots for over a decade. 2 years later, when Ellison put wheat back into that ground, it yielded 47 bushels per acre. His county average that year was 29. Dale Whitfield had circled 3 paragraphs in red pen. The paragraph about taproot depth. The paragraph about organic matter recovery. The paragraph about what Ellison's neighbors said when the wheat came back. In the margin beside the third circled paragraph, in her father's careful handwriting, 4 words, "Tray this if needed." Clara sat in the cab of her father's truck in the cold February light and read that article 3 times. Then she folded it exactly the way her father had folded it, put it in the pocket of his canvas jacket, and drove home. She did not sleep much that night. By the first week of March, she had made her decision. She drove 40 miles to a certified seed supplier in Campbellsville on a Wednesday morning, sat down across from a man named Earl Drummond who had been selling seed in that county for 30 years, and told him she needed sunflower seed for 80 acres. Earl looked at her for a moment. He did not laugh. He pulled out his catalog and helped her select a variety suited to Harlan County soil and rainfall. The seed cost $6,200. It was the last of her emergency cash, money she had been holding back from the debt payments for exactly this kind of moment, though she had not known until now what kind of moment it would be. She split her ground down the middle, 80 acres in sunflowers, 80 acres in wheat, enough to make partial debt payments and keep the co-op account from going to collections. It was a calculated decision, not a desperate one. There is a difference, though from the outside they can look the same. The only person she told was Hattie Marsh. Hattie was 80 years old and had farmed the 200 acres directly east of the Whitfield ground for 43 years before her son took over the operation in 2011. She had known Dale Whitfield since before Clara was born. She had brought food to the farmhouse the week after the funeral and sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours without saying anything that needed to be said. When Clara told her about the sunflowers, about Roy Ellison and the 1987 article and the red pen circles, Hattie listened without interrupting. Then she looked out the kitchen window at the Whitfield ground for a long moment. "Your daddy knew," Hattie said. 3 words. Nothing more. Clara planted the sunflowers in the first week of May. The neighbors started talking before she had even finished planting, and what they were saying got louder with every week that passed. The spring of 2019 came in cold and late across Harlan County, the way Kentucky springs sometimes do. Reluctant gray, the ground staying hard longer than anyone wanted. Clara planted her wheat first, the second week of April, running her father's old drill back and forth across 80 acres in weather that couldn't decide between rain and frost. Then she planted her sunflowers the first week of May, alone in the cab of Dale's tractor, watching the seed go into ground that had not grown anything but wheat in 41 years. She did not hire help. She could not afford to hire help. Every dollar that was not going towards seed or fuel or the minimum payment on the co-op account was sitting in a savings account she was afraid to touch. She worked from first light until she lost the light, came inside, ate whatever was quickest, and went to bed. She got up the next morning and did it again. The wheat came up clean. By late May it was showing well, green and even across all 80 acres, the kind of stand that looks promising in the field even when the soil beneath it is too tired to deliver on that promise. Clara knew what those plants were growing into. She had the soil report. She knew the roots were hitting compaction at 14 inches and spreading sideways instead of down. She knew the yield would be disappointing. But the wheat was not the point of this season. The wheat was the insurance policy. The sunflowers were the experiment, and the sunflowers were visible from the county road. Every farmer who drove past on the way to town slowed down to look. Some of them stopped. A few of them came down the lane and stood at the field edge and shook their heads without saying much. The ones who said something said the same thing in different words, that it was a shame, that Dale would have done it differently, that there was still time to change course before she was too far in to turn around. Gerald Fitch drove past in June. He saw his truck from the tractor cab, the white pickup slowing at the field edge, sitting there for a moment, then moving on. He drove past again in early July, slowed at the same spot, sat for the same moment. She did not wave. He did not stop. At the feed store in town, the conversations went quiet when she walked in and started again when she walked out. She could feel it the way you feel weather coming, a change in pressure, a shift in the room. She bought what she needed and left. She did not explain herself to anyone. There was nothing to explain that the ground would not eventually say better than she could. Then August arrived, and the hailstorm came with it. It moved through Harlan County on a Wednesday afternoon in the second week of August, the kind of fast-moving summer storm that gives you 20 minutes of warning and 4 hours of damage to reckon with afterward. Clara stood on the porch and watched it come across the fields, the sky going green at the edges, the light turning strange and flat, the first hailstones hitting the tin roof of the barn like scattered gravel before the main body of the storm arrived and hit everything at once. When it passed, she walked the sunflower field until dark. 20% of the crop was damaged, heads bent, stalks broken at the neck, whole plants laid flat by the weight and force of the ice. It was not a total loss, but it was enough to change the math, enough to make the already narrow margin between breaking even and falling further behind feel like a crack in the floor she could not see the bottom of. 3 of her neighbors came by the following morning. Harold Yates from the farm to the north, Tommy Briggs from across the road, and Bill Carver, who had farmed the 400 acres directly adjacent to the Whitfield ground for 30 years, and had known Clara since she was old enough to ride on a tractor. Bill stood at the edge of the damaged field for a long time without speaking. Then he turned to her with the kind of expression a man wears when he is about to say something he believes is genuinely kind. "Clara," he said, "there is still time to till these under. Get a late cover crop in, protect the soil over winter, come back with wheat in the spring. Nobody would blame you. Not a single person in this county would say a word against you for it." Clara looked at the damaged sunflowers. She looked at the ones still standing, the majority still upright, still tracking the morning sun the way sunflowers do, heads turning east with a patience that seemed almost deliberate. She looked at Bill Carver's honest face and his 30 years of experience and his genuinely good intentions. "Thank you for coming out, Bill," she said. "I mean that." Then she picked up the broken stalk she had been holding since she walked into the field that morning, set it carefully against the fence post, and went back to work. Yet by September, the exhaustion had moved past the kind that sleep fixes. It lived in her hands now, in the particular ache of her lower back at the end of a long day, in the way she sometimes sat down at the kitchen table in the evening and could not immediately remember what she had meant to do next. The wheat had come in at 31 bushels per acre. The county average was 38. It was enough to make the minimum payment on the debt and put a small amount back toward operating costs for next year. It was not enough to feel like progress. The sunflowers were still in the field, still standing, still doing underground what nobody standing on the surface could see. But let me tell you about September, because September is when Clara sat down at her father's kitchen table with a calculator and a bank statement and looked at the real numbers for the first time. It was a Thursday evening in the third week of September when Clara finally sat down and did the math she had been avoiding since May. She laid everything out on the kitchen table the way her father used to lay out his tools before starting a job. Each thing in its place, nothing hidden, nothing set aside for later. The debt ledger, the bank statement, the wheat payment stub from the grain elevator, 31 bushels per acre on 80 acres at current prices. The hail damage assessment report from the insurance adjuster who had walked the sunflower field 2 weeks earlier and written a number at the bottom of his form that was smaller than she had hoped and larger than she had feared. A calculator her father had kept in the kitchen drawer for 30 years, a Texas Instruments with a crack across the top left corner that had been there since Clara was 12 years old. She sat down. She turned on the single light above the table. Outside the kitchen window, the September dark came down early and complete across the Harlan County fields, the way it does when summer finally decides it is finished. She ran the numbers. The wheat payment covered the minimum debt installment and left $412. The hail settlement would cover approximately 60% of the projected sunflower revenue loss. If the remaining sunflower crop came in at current commodity prices without further damage, she would net somewhere between $41,000 and $47,000 from the 80 acres. Against the outstanding debt of $94,000, minus the wheat payment already made, she would finish the 2019 season still carrying roughly $50,000 of debt. The farmhouse furnace had been quoted at $3,100 to replace. Winter was 10 weeks away. She set the calculator down. She sat with the numbers for a long time without moving, the way you sit with something when you already know what it means and you are just waiting for yourself to accept it. The debt was not going away this season. One good sunflower harvest was not going to fix 41 years of a family farm in a single year. She had known that going in. She had told herself she knew that going in. But knowing something in March and sitting with it in September in a cold kitchen with a broken furnace and $50,000 still on the ledger are two entirely different things. She thought about what Bill Carver had said at the field edge in August. Nobody would blame you. Not a single person in this county would say a word against you. She opened her laptop. She told herself she was only going to look. She told herself it was just information, just numbers, just comparable sales data the way the soil report was just data, something to know, not necessarily something to act on. She pulled up a land listing website and typed in Harlan County, Kentucky, and 160 acres and hit search. There were 4 comparable sales in the past 18 months. The numbers were not bad. With the debt cleared, she would walk away with enough to start something else, something smaller, something that did not require her to be right about a 32-year-old magazine article and a dead man's red pen circles while an entire county watched and waited for her to fail. She looked at those 4 listings for 20 minutes. Her hand rested on the keyboard. Then she closed the laptop. She did not close it because she felt confident. She did not close it because she suddenly believed everything was going to work out the way she needed it to. She closed it because she reached into the pocket of her father's canvas jacket, which was hanging on the back of the chair the way it always hung on the back of that chair, and she took out the folded magazine article, and she put it on the table in front of her under the single light. She looked at her father's red pen circles. She looked at his 4 words in the margin. She said out loud to the empty kitchen, "He circled those paragraphs for a reason." No one answered. The furnace did not come on because the furnace was broken. The September dark pressed against the kitchen window and did not move. Clara folded the article back the way her father had folded it, put it in the jacket pocket, turned off the light, went to bed. She closed the laptop. She did not open it again for 2 years. The sunflower harvest came in during the first week of October 2019, and it came in better than the numbers had suggested it would. $47,000 net. After seed costs, after fuel, after the equipment hours, after the partial loss from the August hailstorm, $47,000 from 80 acres of ground that Gerald Fitch had told her was wheat ground and always would be. It was more than Dale Whitfield had netted from his entire 160-acre operation in any single year since 2015. It was more than 3 of his wheat seasons combined. Clara deposited the check on a Tuesday morning, drove home, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the debt ledger for a long time. $50,000 remaining. The furnace was replaced. The minimum payments were current. For the first time since October of 2018, the numbers on the ledger were moving in the right direction, but the money was not the real story. The real story was happening 4 inches underground, and 6 inches underground, and 10 inches underground, and in some places 6 full feet underground, in the root channels that 80 acres of sunflowers had spent an entire growing season pressing into soil that had not been asked to do anything new in 41 years. Clara soil tested the sunflower ground in March of 2020 before she decided what to plant back into it. She sent the samples to the same lab she had used in 2018, asked for the same battery of tests, and drove to Campbellsville to sit across from her extension contact, a soil scientist named Dr. Patricia Holm, who had been analyzing Harlan County ground for 22 years. Dr. Holm looked at the 2020 results beside the 2018 baseline for a long moment before she said anything. "Clara," she said finally. "What did you put in this ground?" "Sunflowers," Clara said. "1 season, 80 acres. Dr. Holm looked at the numbers again. Organic matter had moved from 1.1% to 1.9% in a single growing season, an increase that typically takes 3 to 5 years of deliberate soil management to achieve. Compaction had been measured at 14 inches depth in 2018, was broken through the full top 14 inches of the profile. Earthworm counts had moved from near zero to populations that Dr. Holm described as robust for Harlan County ground. The soil structure in the samples, the way the particles clung together, the pore spaces between them, the dark crumbly texture that good topsoil has when it is alive and working, was measurably different from the pale compacted samples Clara had brought in 2 years before. This is what the sunflowers had done underground while the county road traffic slowed to stare at them, and Gerald Fitch shook his head from his white pickup, and Bill Carver stood at the field edge with his 30 years of experience and his genuinely good intentions, and offered Clara a graceful way out. The sunflower taproot is not a surface root. It does not spread wide and shallow the way wheat roots do when they hit a compaction layer and have nowhere else to go. The sunflower taproot goes down. It follows the path of least resistance through the soil profile, and where there is no path of least resistance it makes one, pressing through hardpan, fracturing compacted layers, leaving behind root channels that persist in the soil long after the plant itself is gone. Those channels become pathways for water, for air, for the next crop's roots to follow down into soil they could not have reached before. Roy Ellison had known this in 1987. Dale Whitfield had read about it in 1987 and folded the article into his glove box and carried it for 32 years. Clara had found it in February of 2019 and spent $6,200 and 1 full season and 1 very dark Thursday evening in September proving that the three of them were right. She planted wheat back into the rehabilitated ground in the fall of 2020. The 2021 harvest came in at 51 bushels per acre. The Harlan County average that year was 29. Most of those farms, averaging 29 bushels, bought their inputs from the Harlan County Farm Co-op. Most of them had been buying their inputs from Gerald Fitch for longer than Clara had been farming. By the time the 2021 numbers came in, 3 of her neighbors had already lost their farms, and the man who had laughed loudest in that co-op was about to drive out to see her. The farm crisis that came to Harlan County in 2020 and 2021 did not arrive all at once the way a hailstorm arrives. It came the way a slow leak comes, quietly, steadily, in a direction that everyone could see but nobody wanted to name out loud until the damage was already done. Wheat prices had been softening since late 2019. By the spring of 2020, they had dropped to levels that made break-even impossible for any operation carrying significant debt. Input costs moved in the opposite direction: fuel, fertilizer, chemical applications, equipment maintenance, all of it climbing while the price at the grain elevator fell. The farmers who had borrowed to expand during the better years, the ones who had financed new equipment at the co-op and leased additional acres and taken operating loans against the next harvest, found themselves standing in a field doing math that no longer worked, no matter how many times they ran it. Gerald Fitch's brother-in-law was the first one Clara heard about. His name was Raymond Deal, and he had farmed 300 acres in the eastern part of the county for 22 years. He was a careful man, a good farmer, someone who had done most things right for most of his career. But in 2018, he had financed a new combine at 14% interest and leased an additional 80 acres he did not strictly need because the opportunity was there and the banker had told him the timing was right. When wheat dropped below his break-even number in January of 2021, the combine payment did not drop with it. Raymond Deal lost his 300 acres on a Wednesday morning in January, signed the papers at a title company in Elizabethtown, and drove home to tell his wife. 2 foreclosure auctions followed in Harlan County that spring. The first was in March. The second was in April. Clara attended both of them. She stood at the back. She did not bid. She did not speak to anyone beyond a quiet greeting to the people she had known since childhood. The families standing at the front of those auction rooms with the particular stillness of people who have already finished grieving and are now simply enduring the last formality of a loss that happened months ago in a banker's office. She watched the equipment get numbered and the land get parceled and the years of work get converted into line items on a liquidation sheet. She thought about her father's kitchen table. She thought about the Thursday evening in September of 2019 when she had opened a land listing website and rested her hand on the keyboard for 20 minutes. She thought about how close she had come to being in the front of one of these rooms instead of the back. She paid the remaining balance on her $94,000 debt in full on the 14th of March, 2021. She drove to the bank, handed the teller a check, waited for the receipt, folded it once, and put it in the pocket of her father's canvas jacket. She told no one. Gerald Fitch came to see her on a Thursday afternoon in April, and he did not call ahead. She was checking soil moisture in the east field when she heard the truck come down the lane. It was the 3rd week of April 2021, and the wheat in that field was the best stand Clara had seen on Whitfield ground in 20 years. Thick and even and a deep particular green that good wheat gets when the roots beneath it have room to go where they need to go. She had been walking the rows since mid-morning, pressing a moisture probe into the soil at intervals, recording the readings in the small notebook she kept in her shirt pocket the way her father had kept his. She did not look up when the truck pulled in. She finished the row she was on, recorded the last reading, and then straightened and turned around. Gerald Fitch was standing at the field edge. He was 54 years old, and he looked it that afternoon in a way he had not always looked it. Something in the set of his shoulders The way he stood with his hands at his sides instead of his usual posture of a man who owned whatever room he was standing in. He was not wearing his pressed flannel. He had driven out in a plain gray jacket and work boots, and he stood at the edge of Clara Whitfield's best wheat field and looked at the ground for a long moment before he looked at her. She walked toward him and stopped at the field edge. Neither of them said anything for a moment. A red-tailed hawk moved across the sky above the far tree line and was gone. The wheat moved in the April wind the way good wheat moves, easy and certain, sure of itself. Gerald Fitch cleared his throat. "Clara," he said, "I came out here because I owe you something, and I have been putting it off long enough." She waited. "I said your daddy would be embarrassed," he said. "I said it in front of 8 men in my co-op, and I said it loud enough that nobody in that room missed it." He paused. "I was wrong. I was wrong about the sunflowers, and I was wrong about you, and I was wrong to say what I said the way I said it in front of those men. That is what I came to tell you." Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the wheat field, her father's ground, rehabilitated now, carrying 51 bushels per acre on soil that had been making 28 3 years before. She thought about Dale Whitfield and a red pen and 4 words in the margin of a 32-year-old magazine article. She thought about Roy Ellison in Dodge City in 1984 planting sunflowers while his neighbors shook their heads. She thought about Hattie Marsh sitting at the kitchen table after the funeral saying nothing that needed to be said. "My father left me the answer," Clara said. "I just had to trust it." Gerald nodded slowly. He looked at the wheat one more time. The full length of the field, the even stand, the deep green of roots that had gone where they needed to go. Then he extended his hand. Clara shook it. He walked back to his truck, started the engine, and drove back down the lane the way he had come. Clara watched the truck until it reached the county road and turned north toward town. Then she took her moisture probe out of her shirt pocket and went back to work. The field needed her attention more than the moment did. But the story does not end in that field. Because what Clara did next is the reason I am telling you this story at all. Clara met Denna Pruitt on a Friday morning in March of 2022 at the Elizabethtown feed store. In the aisle between the seed displays and the soil amendment shelves is where a certain kind of conversation tends to happen in farming communities, when one person recognizes something in another person that most people in the room would miss. Dina was 26 years old, slight and dark-haired, wearing a jacket that was slightly too large for her, in the way that jackets are when they belong to someone else. She was standing in front of a row of soil amendment products, reading the labels, with the focused attention of someone who is trying to learn something quickly because the situation requires it. Clara watched her for a moment from the end of the aisle. Then she walked over. "You inherited ground," Clara said. It was not a question. Dina looked at her. 90 acres, she said. "My uncle passed in September. Left it to me because I was the only one in the family who ever wanted to farm it." Clara nodded. "What are you planning to plant?" "That is what I am trying to figure out," Dina said. She gestured at the shelf in front of her. "Everyone keeps telling me to lease it out. Let someone with experience handle it. The man at the co-op, Gerald Fitch, he told me I should find a reliable tenant operator and collect the rent and not try to go it alone my first year." Clara was quiet for a moment. "How much time do you have right now?" she said. Dina looked at her. "As much as you need," she said. They sat in Clara's truck in the feed store parking lot for 2 hours. Clara pulled the soil test data from her phone, the 2018 baseline numbers, and the 2020 post-sunflower results side by side, and walked Dina through every line. She explained the taproot mechanism the way Dr. Patricia Holm had explained it to her, in plain language that did not require a soil science degree to follow. She talked about Roy Ellison in Dodge City, and the 1984 decision, and the 47 bushels per acre that came back 2 years later when everyone said it wouldn't. She talked about the $6,200 seed purchase and the hailstorm And the Thursday evening in September, with the calculator and the broken furnace and the land listing website open on the laptop for 20 minutes. She told Dina all of it. Not the version where she had been certain and confident and right from the beginning. The real version. The version with the dark kitchen table and the hand on the keyboard and the 4 words spoken out loud to an empty room. Then she reached into the pocket of her father's canvas jacket and took out the 1987 Progressive Farmer article. It was more worn now than it had been when she found it in the glove box in February of 2019. The creases softer, paper thinner at the folds, the edges beginning to feather from 3 years of being taken out and put back. Dale Whitfield's red pen circles were still clear. His 4 words in the margin were still legible. Try this if needed. Clara drove to the feed store's small office and asked to use their copy machine. She made 1 clean copy of the article, her father's red circles coming through dark and precise on the fresh page, and brought it back to Dina. She took a pen from her jacket pocket. In the margin beside her father's 4 words in her own handwriting, she wrote 1 line, "Trust the soil. It remembers everything you put in." She handed the copy to Dina and kept the original. Dina looked at the page for a long moment. She looked at the 2 sets of handwriting in the margin, the older careful script and the newer line beside it. And she did not say anything for a moment, because there was nothing that needed to be said that the page had not already said better. She planted 40 of her 90 acres in sunflowers that spring. She did not ask Gerald Fitch for his opinion. And that brings me to you, because this story was never only about sunflowers. Go back with me for a moment to that Thursday morning in March of 2019. Clara Whitfield is standing in the Harlan County Farm Co-op in her father's canvas jacket, with a soil report folded under her arm that nobody asked to see. Gerald Fitch is behind the counter with his 19 years of certainty and his clean hands and his room full of men who have already decided what they think before she has finished her sentence. The laugh carries across the room. 8 men turn around. The words land the way words land when they are spoken loudly in front of witnesses, not just as sound but as verdict. Your daddy would be embarrassed. That moment looked like an ending. It felt like one. To everyone in that room it was a conclusion. A young woman who didn't understand farming, didn't understand land, didn't understand the way things work in Harlan County, and probably never would. Gerald Fitch went back to his counter. The 8 men went back to their conversations. The room moved on in the way that rooms move on after someone has been put back in their place. What nobody in that room could see was what was coming, not the sunflowers, not the $47,000 harvest, not the soil test results that made Dr. Patricia Holm put down her pen and ask what Clara had put in that ground, not the 51 bushels per acre on soil that had been making 28, not the debt paid in full on a Tuesday morning in March, while 2 foreclosure auctions were being scheduled 2 counties over. Not Dina Pruitt sitting in a truck in a feed store parking lot 2 years later, with a photocopied magazine article in her hands and 40 acres of her own ground about to be changed by the same knowledge that had been folded in a glove box for 32 years waiting for someone to trust it. None of that was visible from the counter of the Harlan County Farm Co-op on a Thursday morning in March of 2019. And here is what I want you to understand, because this was never a story about sunflowers. This was a story about what happens when you put something real into the ground and have the patience to wait for it to come back. What you invest with care and knowledge and the willingness to look foolish for long enough, it remembers. The soil remembered every root channel those sunflowers pressed into the hard pan. The ground remembered every season Dale Whitfield had worked it before he had the words to explain what he was doing. And the people in our lives, the ones we teach, the ones we hand a folded piece of paper to in a parking lot on a Friday morning, they remember too. Right now, somewhere, someone is laughing at your sunflowers. Maybe it is a business idea they say will never work. Maybe it is a piece of land they say is not worth farming. Maybe it is a method they say is too slow, too old, too unconventional, too much trouble for too little return. Maybe it is simply the fact that you are doing something the careful way in a world that only respects things that happen fast. Whatever it is, whatever your sunflower field looks like right now, I want you to hear this clearly. The ground does not care what Gerald Fitch thinks. The ground only cares what you put into it. If this story reached something in you, if it reminded you of your own dark kitchen table, your own calculator, your own Thursday evening when the easy path was one phone call away, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, subscribe to this channel. Every week we tell the stories of the people who did it the slow way, the careful way, the way that looked foolish from the county road and looked like wisdom 20 years later. You belong here. Second, leave a comment below and tell me this. Has anyone ever laughed at your sunflowers? Has anyone ever told you that what you were building was not worth building, that the ground you were working was not worth working, that the slow, patient thing you believed in was a waste of time? And were they wrong? Tell me below. I read every single one. Third, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. You know exactly who that person is. They are sitting right now with a calculator and a bank statement and a laptop open to something they should not open. Send this to them. It might be the thing that makes them close it. They laughed at her sunflowers. 2 years later, her soil remembered every seed she had put in. The question is, what are you planting right now that they cannot see yet?